Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful day. We pray that you'll bless our time together, and always help us to keep in mind that as we discuss some pretty heavy topics about the times in which we certainly appear to live, that you will always help us to remind us that we're not to be given a spirit of fear, that we always have this great hope of being with you someday. And Lord, we pray that you would hasten the day when that would occur. Bless us today in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, so, boy, we talk about a lot of things here. This is sort of my little grid that I use: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. And I think you'll see some of that today as I go through. Things are happening very quickly. Everything seems to be happening all at the same time. Then there's also some things that have to happen, but there have to be certain things in place before they can happen. You know, so for example, if you have, I think I was discussing this with somebody just overnight, a beast system, you'll have a mark of the beast, but there's a system behind it. And so the logistics of that have to be in place. It's not just going to pop out of nowhere, I guess is the best way to say that. And then understanding, and that's based on this, that as we get closer to the time of the end, and as long as we're in the Word and we're looking at these things, I think that those that are wise will understand and instruct many. That's what it says in Daniel chapter 11. So I talk a lot about that. So today I'm talking about World War III, World War E, I'm sorry. That was my title, World War E. And that stands for energy, because that's a very big deal. And I think that's going to be a really big deal in the months ahead, and I'll explain some of that in the beginning. So just so you know, I'm going to do a live interview, talk, I guess. I don't know if I like the term interview, because I was a lawyer. And lawyers, we do depositions, okay? So I think I've probably done thousands of depositions, and that's very formal, and that is like an interview under oath. And so I sort of cringe when I hear interview, because I don't want to feel like I'm being, I'm under the Inquisition or anything like that. So tomorrow at 4:45 or 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:45 to 2 o'clock Pacific Time, and you can figure that out. I'll be with Tom Hughes live on his channel, his YouTube channel, not his channel, but that's a separate website, but on Hope for Our Times YouTube channel. So you can go there and listen to that. I may post it later on our website if I get a copy of it recorded or downloaded. So I did that a week or so, maybe a week or two ago. So I'll be doing that, and then I think in a week or so I'm going to be doing Stand Up for the Truth with David Fiorazzo on probably 2 weeks, because we're going to do it 2 days after the midterm elections, because we thought there might be something to talk about. Hopefully good news, but I also want to remind you on this political thing too is, we do things politically, but they're not ultimately going to stop things. But there are things I think that we can do to help protect people and that sort of thing. And I'll talk a little bit about that, because some of the things I see going on are just very egregious. And the fact that the Lord has not completely just flattened America for the things that have gone on in America only shows that he's a God of grace. But eventually this will get out. So here's sort of where I got the title, one of the titles. This is an interview with a securities financial expert, Ed Rubini, or Nouriel Rubini. I seem to recall talking to him. We had a bunch of securities cases at one of my law firms, and I remember having a conversation with him. Now, he's always been known sort of as Dr. Doom. So we love him here at FBC. But here's what he said when he was interviewed. the other day about what he thinks is coming.
It's a very serious issue. I believe that we are already for sure in a Cold War, and we'll have a decoupling between US and China, trade in goods, in services, in the movement of labor, of capital, investments, but more importantly right now, everything this important is having to do with technology, data, and information that is from a national security point of view, severe and important. So the decoupling is occurring. The Cold War between US and China in terms of overall political and geopolitical relations is becoming worse. And the reason why Xi Jinping right now is seeking a third term and possibly a fourth is not because he wants to pass to history as the man who reformed China, it's because he wants to pass to history as the man that united mainland with Taiwan. So I believe the next 5 to 10 years is going to be the time where there's going to be a confrontation between US and China on the issue of Taiwan, and that could be a trigger of this Cold War becoming a hot war. We don't know whether it's going to happen, how it's going to be resolved, but that's where we get to World War III, among other things. But in some sense, World War III has already started. It started in Ukraine, because this conflict has broader implications than going well beyond Russia and Ukraine. It's the beginning of something else.
You didn't mention climate change, so I'm assuming you're not worried about that.
Well, there's a full chapter about an uninhabitable planet, about climate change. And it's a long discussion, but the reality is there's a lot of talk about doing something about climate change. There's a lot of talk about ESG investment, environmental, social, and governance, and so on. But the reality is a lot of it is greenwashing. A lot of it is green wishing. A lot of it is green fig leaves of people who say we're going to do something. Government, firms, individual, they're doing nothing. Glasgow and COP was a total failure. At the current level, we're headed towards an increase of temperature by the end of this century of 3 degrees. Even 2 will be a disaster. 3 means that half of the world will be in places that are either underwater or too hot to live. And if you worry about a few 100,000 migrants from Central America moving here, wait until there be not a few 100,000, but millions or billions of people who have to move from places that you cannot live to other parts of the world. That's going to be an economic and financial disaster.
Everything's climate change, right? And there are things too that we have to understand is that one of the characteristics of Jesus being Messiah was his control of the weather. Remember when he had the thing on the boat? And it's what manner of men is this that even the wind and the seas obey him? And so I'm somewhat skeptical of claims that men control all the weather. Because, and look, I'm aware of the arguments, okay? I know whenever there's a fire in California, people say, well, that was caused by, some kind of directed energy weapon or something like that. And it's possible, okay? I'm not discounting it completely, but I also note that the fires only seem to occur in fire-prone areas. And you understand, I think it would be really show me the power of this directed energy weapon if, say, the middle of Lake Erie caught on fire. Well, that's maybe not a good example because we know the Cuyahoga River back in the 60s caught on fire, so because of all the junk in it. But there is something going on with the weather. There is this complete, this convergence of events. The Mississippi is down, so barge traffic is having trouble going. They've canceled all the river cruises on certain places on the Mississippi River system, which includes the feeders from the Missouri and the Ohio and that type, and those rivers. And, we have this very unique river system in the United States. It's unlike any in the world, where our heartland has access to water. And water transportation of goods is about 1/10 as expensive, 1/10 the cost of almost like everything else, anything else that's efficient. So trucking is really expensive. And of course, what do we do in our country is we try to, we put in laws in place to require more trucking, which makes the goods more expensive to deliver. But I was just reading, I don't even have any, I was trying to pull off some graphics on this. You've heard about the floods in Pakistan? 1/3 of the country underwater. And how many people live in Pakistan? 200 million? I mean, it's a very populous country. It's one of the most populated countries on the planet. They've had 1 million homes destroyed in this flood that's happened over the last 6 months. They've had 15 million people displaced internally. That's the population like of 2 Ohios. Everybody has had to move. These things just, they seem to be happening a lot. And Pakistan is unique because Pakistan gets a lot of their water from glacial melt. But as the glaciers move, and if you've been up to northern Ohio and Kelly's Island, you can see the effect of glaciers. They bring a lot of debris with them. And so what happens is there's a dam, I think it's called the Tarbella Dam in Pakistan. It's the largest dam on planet Earth. It used to hold, I'm going to pull a number out of the air, so you can look it up. I think it was like 13 trillion cubic meters of water. It's huge, hydroelectric and that type of thing. But as the glacier melt comes down, it brings a lot of what? Dirt and sludge and that type of stuff with it. And that settles in the dam. And now the dam, which was 13 trillion cubic meters of water, is now 7.5 trillion cubic meters of water because of the sediment. Well, that has an impact on the effectiveness of that dam. And the dam, as one commentator I was looking at this morning said, that dam is sinking. And they have other dams that are the same problem. And so what Rubini said in this little interview was, we complain about 300,000, 200,000, 1 million immigrants on the southern border of the United States. But what happens when it's 15 million? And some of that may be by design, too. I understand that they want more to come in. I think there's documents that say that they want 100 million to come in. And so part of this is the plan. So there is something going on, but I think we're also in a different sunspot cycle and maybe a cooling cycle of the sun, which is going to impact a lot of things. And then when you add on top of it World War E over energy, you have the makings of I don't know how else to say it, end time stuff. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, I'll quote it here in a minute. I was reading the Financial Times, and it was like reading through the book of Revelation, a financial newspaper from the UK about what's going on. Let's just talk about it. So there's all this stuff about free speech and that type of thing that we're very concerned about. And Elon Musk, and I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk, okay, because he's interesting, and it's like a lot of people in public life. He does some things that I kind of like, that I kind of admire, but then, I have this thinking he's kind of weird. Like the lady that he has had a couple, I think he has like 8 children. I don't know how many different mothers, at least 3. And he had this gal that he had the most recent kids with, and she's a witch. I don't know how else to describe it. And she's very, very strange. So, you wonder, I guess he's just proof that God doesn't give one person everything, right? Because he might be smart, and he might be innovative, might even be a visionary, but then, he doesn't really make good choices in his personal life. So you can admire somebody, but you don't have to endorse everything that they do. But so he's buying Twitter. And the left in the world is melting down because Elon Musk is buying Twitter, and he might actually open it up to free speech, not censor things. He's going to try to get rid of the bots that seem to populate Twitter. And so when that happens, what does our government do? Our government immediately steps in and say, we're going to investigate him, for security problems. Why? Well, because he announced that the Starlink network that he's put up, the satellites, he was going to stop allowing that to be used by Ukraine. He just didn't want to provide it for free anymore. And now the government's going to investigate him. And we're in a war here in the United States, where if they don't like you, they will shut you down. I heard Julian Appling from one of the pro-life clinic organizations up in Wisconsin on Stand Up for the Truth the other day, and she said, we were firebombed back around Mother's Day. And the people signed their thing, Jane's Revenge. And she's hardly heard from anybody. They came, by the way, and took DNA swabs of all the people that worked at the clinic because they're trying to exclude. But so the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms did that. But she's never heard the results of that or the FBI or anything like that. But now we have, I think the number is up to about 35 pro-life activists who've gone to abortion clinics and prayed and that type of thing, have been indicted, and they're indicted under the SAFE Act, which could result in them going to prison for 11 years. And I've seen the pictures of them. They're sitting in a hallway singing hymns, Christian hymns. They're reading the Bible. And so they're under indictment, including this one lady from, I think it was Philadelphia. She was arrested. Maybe it was Buffalo. She's 87 years old. She's a big threat. I've slept so much better since I know that she was arrested. But here's some things. So let's just look at this. We'll look at transgender stuff. We'll look at some of a big conference that's going on this week. We'll talk a little bit about Israel. We'll talk about energy. And of course, we won't get finished. And you'll hear me say, I just have one more thing about 40 times. So just assume that's just kind of filler. I say I have, just one more thing. That's I do that instead of clearing my throat all the time, which can be kind of annoying. So this was from the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago. And now I also get criticized. People say, well, you put this, you cite mainstream sources. Everything in there is a lie. And I don't believe everything in there is a lie. Everything in there is spun to further an agenda. But this is the story. This is where it came from. And all the pro-life websites picked up on it. So I went back to the original source. And this Virginia bill, this lady, Delegate Elizabeth Guzman in Virginia, she's a Democrat, put out a bill. And the bill, when you looked at the bill and maybe interpreted the bill, applied the bill, because people pass laws. And they don't think through every implication. I know that I've seen these people work, legislators and that type of thing. They don't think through every implication of their law. So when pro-life people looked at the bill, they said, wait a minute, if what we understand in the bill is true, if you don't affirm your child's gender transition, you can be charged with child abuse. And of course, there were news reports about this. Here's what the Washington Post article said. I think it was October 14th. A Northern Virginia legislator found herself at the center of the nation's LGBTQ culture wars after saying she would reintroduce a bill that barely made a stir when she first submitted it 2 years ago. And that ought to be a warning sign. Is they've been working on this stuff for a while. You're going to see some stuff today that goes back to like 2015. That conservatives are just sort of now like, wait a minute, where did all that come from? So she said she would expand the definition of child abuse to include inflicting physical or mental injury on children due to their gender identity or sexual orientation. So she reintroduced the bill. And then she said, that's not what I was going to do. I was not going to try to go after parents for child abuse, In fact, here's what she said. These are some of her tweets. Hang on a second here. It seems like I'm instead of going through every one of these, because it's clear that she is she's defending herself. And she'll say, why did I do this? Why did I give an interview? Why didn't I hide from a story that could have been and was twisted to misrepresent what was an anti-abuse bill? Why didn't I play it safe and stay silent when presented an opportunity to talk about all these issues? Because Governor Youngkin, he was a Republican who was elected. Remember, they had a lot of school board protests and that type of thing, which led to the federal government issuing a directive that these were domestic terrorists who were going and complaining about what was being taught to their children. They were actually going to school boards and saying, I don't like what you're doing with my child. Stop it. So now under the federal government says you're a domestic terrorist. Just like if you protested an abortion clinic, you're a domestic terrorist. And the people who are the domestic terrorists who attack a pro-life pregnancy center, nothing ever happens to them. There have been about 100 attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers, pregnancy decision centers, 0 arrests. And you know what happened? You see all this stuff happening in New York and that type of thing, people getting, punched in the head, and the people get arrested, and they're out of jail on no bail before the person who they injured is seen by a doctor at the clinic. I mean, it's literally about that bad. So she says, Governor Youngkin is a bully, and I will always stand up to bullies because I saw students across Virginia willing to stand up and protest and fight for their peers, and I want all of Virginia's LGBTQ kids to know that you are loved and Delegate Guzman has your back. Listen, she knew what this bill could do. And so here's sort of a rule of thumb. She's lying. If her lips are moving, she's lying. Because of her political orientation. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to say it. She said she didn't know about this. By the way, the ACLU branch, the Virginia branch of the ACLU came out and said this was a gender-affirming bill, a bill about gender-affirming. The ACLU, which is hardly a right-wing organization, in case you didn't know that. So she didn't do that. I was starting to look up a site there. You can look up this site called Pride Basics. Now, understand, when you go look at some of this stuff, be very careful, because you're going to see stuff that is just unbelievable. So I came up with this one site. So the other day I did a live update. I had all kinds. Once I mentioned the name of a certain government agency that makes decisions about state-approved treatments for Charlie Vector 019er, my audio dropped out. I had trouble with my video. So this organization has funded, to the tune of about almost $100 million, schools to develop LGBTQ clubs for children. Now, wait a minute, you're saying, is that part of their mission? In our government, it is. $85 million to develop clubs. So I went back and dug this out, and I think this publication originated about 2015, and it's called Schools in Transition, a guide for supporting transgender students in K-12 schools. This is the hub of the problem. And look at the organizations that are involved in this. ACLU, a group called Gender Spectrum, the Human Rights Campaign, National Center for Lesbian Rights, and the National Education Association. So when the dispute developed down in Hilliard schools about the teachers who had their name badges, and on their name badges was a QR code, so the kids could scan it with their phone and it would take them to the NEA sexual education website, which has stuff on it that if you're a parent, you want to talk to your kids about this, not somebody else. So, but look at some of the things in this, and I could spend the whole time talking about this, privacy and disclosure. Far more than the age of the student. Now remember, they always say, we don't do anything with minors. We don't, all the hospitals that do these transition surgeries, where they sterilize kids, top surgeries, bottom surgeries, they sterilize them. They give them puberty blockers, which they don't know the long-term effects of. They do it because they make money. There's billions of dollars at stake. So far more than the age of the student, the degree to which others are aware of the student's gender transition will dictate what is necessary to make the transition go smoothly. And then down at the bottom, it says this: schools are uniquely positioned to serve as a buffer to protect students and their families. Now listen, my mother was a teacher. My mother-in-law was a teacher. I went to school. And so I know that there are children at school that have horrible home lives. I mean, it's awful what some children go through. And we all know this. But I'm telling you that there is a concerted effort to undermine parental authority by the left in this country and worldwide. I saw an interview with Trevor Loudon, you could probably find it on Rumble, where he talked about where all of this is coming from, and I don't have time to go into it here, but let me tell you that it is a cultural war, okay? And this will permanently damage children. And they always come out with these statistics. Well, if you don't do it, they'll commit suicide. But what do the stats show? Well, Johns Hopkins, which did the first gender transition surgery in the United States, I think back in the 50s or 60s, they found out that when they did the transition, because of the mental distress that they had, they would go ahead and do the surgery. They found that the people who had the surgery were 19 times more likely to commit suicide. So all of this stuff that you hear from these people, it's a big fat lie. The NEA, they're big fat liars. They're trying to undermine the family unit. And that's an end time thing. And unfortunately, they seem to be succeeding. So here's another part of this thing from Schools in Transition, talking points. And they have all of these talking points for teachers and everybody to follow. And this is happening over in Hilliard. There was I think Channel 6 had a report on it the other day, and some of the school board people were like, we don't like this, like 3 of them. So what happened? Well, the Education Association, the union for the teachers, did like a document wanting to censor the school board members who seemed to be going along with us, or allowed there to be a discussion about it at the school board meeting. That was the teachers, the ones with the little QR codes on their name badges. And you saw the first page here. Who's one of the big proponents of this? The National Education Association. Because, listen, the schools have done so good educating students on everything, like math and reading and that type of thing. So why shouldn't they go off into this extra area? This is 2 documents that are included in the appendix to this Schools in Transition, and they're essentially application forms. And one is for a gender support plan, and then the other one is for a gender transition plan. And so this document supports the necessary planning for a student's formal transition of gender. By the way, how many of you knew that schools all across the country have a document like this, gender transition plan? I'll bet nobody, I'm shocked It doesn't take much to shock me, but as I'm digging through this, I am telling you that there is a network of all these organizations and all these different things that they do, and then books, that type of thing. Believe me, folks, this is so far gone. And I pray and hope that people get involved to stop it. Because kids' lives and their eternities at stake. Now, I don't think that stopping it necessarily means that they're going to get saved. You understand what I'm saying? But this is very troubling. So, and so here's what this says. But look at this thing. They have a question on here. Parent-guardian involvement. Are guardians of this student aware and supportive of their child's gender transition? And then the other one says gender identification. Yes or no? If not, what considerations must be accounted for in implementing the plan? You see what happens? They check no, the parents aren't on board. Okay, now how are we going to implement the plan? With that in mind. They don't care about parents. Planned Parenthood is involved in this. I mean, by the way, Planned Parenthood is one of the most misnamed organizations ever because they don't want people to become parents. That's the whole idea. Did you see what Stacey Abrams, who's running for governor of Georgia, said this week? She's a big pro-abortion supporter. And she said, well, this inflation, that people who care about that are people who have children. The implication being, don't have children, you won't worry about inflation. And she doesn't have children, by the way. She's in her 40s. So here's a little ad that Planned Parenthood put out, video about...
There's no one-size-fits-all puberty experience. If you're trans, intersex, or non-binary, know that you're not the only one feeling confused. For some intersex people, puberty may start later than age 14. You might experience some of puberty's changes and not others, and your body may or may not go through puberty on its own. There are medicines you can take to help your body start the process, like hormone replacement therapy. Some people decide on hormones or surgeries to help their bodies match up to their gender identity, or how they feel inside about themselves. Your gender identity is real. You should be the one to decide what changes you want to make to your body. If you're transgender or non-binary, you may find that your puberty experiences don't line up with your gender identity or how you see yourself. That feeling can be uncomfortable, scary, and stressful. If that sounds like you, know that you're not alone. There are medicines you can take to delay puberty for a while. They're called puberty blockers, and they work like a stop sign by halting the hormones testosterone and estrogen that cause puberty changes like facial hair growth and periods. Puberty blockers are safe and can give you more time to figure out what feels right for you, your body, and your gender identity. You don't have to have all of the answers right now. So remember, it's all a work in progress, and it may take time to figure out what feels right to you, but talking to a trusted adult and a nurse or doctor may help. Want to learn more? Go to PlannedParenthood.org/teens.
Now, do you understand? Everything they say is a lie. We're not after minorities. PlannedParenthood.org/teens. Or children who have not yet reached the age of majority. I'm sorry. I misstated that. They want to get the kids. This is an agenda. Here's something this is going on in the UK. In Scotland, they're trying to vote to allow 16-year-olds to legally change their gender. So Nicole Sturgeon, who's the prime minister in Scotland, she's in favor of this bill. And what they essentially want to do is they want to reduce the waiting period to change gender from 2 years to 3 months. Why? Because they want to get them before they change their mind. And with puberty blockers, nobody knows that they're safe. You know what they started using these for? They were to essentially chemically castrate men who'd been convicted of, for example, child sexual molestation. And they want to give them to kids. And so there was a clinic in the UK called Tavistock that was involved in this. And the numbers are just like unbelievable. The increase They went from 30 inquiries a year to 8,000 a year in a very short period of time. Because they're really trying, I'm telling you, there's a big agenda behind this. And Tavistock, they closed it down in the UK. There are now I understand, over 1,000 families suing them for what they did to their children. And I hope they get everything coming to them financially. But here's an interesting quote. This is the big quote in the article in the Times of London. Voters don't understand why this is a priority. Why are they pushing this? That's what people don't understand that. Because there's a big agenda, and it's demonic and it's evil. And it really is end time stuff. Do you think Lot had to put up with this stuff? In Sodom and Gomorrah, which the Lord destroyed because of their wickedness. I think we've gone way, way beyond that. So these are some of the things I talked about in my update, and again, I apologize for the technical issues that I had, but I'll talk more about this and actually I'm preparing a talk for Canada for next spring where I'm going to talk about this one world religion that's coming together on many, many levels, including what happened in Kazakhstan back in September with the Pope and a bunch of those people. And then the Vatican kind of got involved and said, well, maybe we shouldn't have this language in there, so we're going to have to change it. But I'll talk more about that in the future. But these are some of the things that on the energy side that I think need to be discussed. So here's an article from the Wall Street Journal this week. New England, which relies on natural gas imports to bridge winter gas supply gaps, is now competing with European countries for shipments of liquefied natural gas following Russia's halt of most pipeline gas to the continent. Why? Because we have LNG companies that are trying to get gas to Europe. But there are not enough ships. But it's interrupting the gas supply in the United States. And so what they're saying is the person comes out, the region's power grid operator, ISO New England, Inc., has warned that an extremely cold winter could strain the reliability of the grid and potentially result in the need for rolling blackouts to keep electricity supply and demand in balance. The warning comes as executives, this is New England, United States, that they're talking about this. And I'm seeing this being talked about more and more in the United States, increasing energy costs, and then now rolling blackouts in a very heavily populated part of our country. The warning comes as executives and analysts predict power producers could have to pay as much as several times more than last year for gas deliveries if severe weather creates urgent need for spot market purchases. If you are in the commercial sector, at what point do you buy fuel? Power producers in New England are limited in their ability to store fuel on site and face challenges in contracting for gas supplies. Do you use home heating oil instead of gas or electric for heating? In northeastern Pennsylvania, people have called to get their winter supply of home heating oil, and they said, well, you'll get half. Are you aware of this? Is NBC talking about it? Is President Biden talking about it? The man who cares about everybody. Is Karine Jean-Pierre talking about it? I saw an interview with Andrea Mitchell of Nancy Pelosi. Did you see this? Andrea Mitchell, isn't she married to Greenspan? Isn't that her husband? Former guy in the Federal Reserve. And the question Andrea Mitchell asked like this. So can you imagine a conservative being asked like this? Congresswoman Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, do you sometimes feel like you don't get credit for all the great things you do for the United States? That's exactly what almost word for word what the question was. And and the media wonders like why people don't trust them. It's unbelievable. But this is going all over natural gas. Here's Some other stories, this is from the Financial Times in the UK. European industry digs in for a long winter. And the quote from the article, the alarm bells are ringing among Europeans politicians. We are risking a massive deindustrialization of the European continent, said the Belgium's Prime Minister. What's happening? The companies can't afford the gas, so they're shutting down. Croatia, the largest aluminum smelter, shut down. They can't afford the gas. Sweden, their smelters and other industrial things are shutting down because they can't afford the gas. They're saying our labor cost is too high, and now our energy costs are too high. These are going to have to go to someplace where the labor cost is lower. But do you understand what happens in the transition? There's a lot of economic carnage that goes when you shut everything down. That has a rolling effect through the economy. In Europe, one country, you need natural gas to make ammonia for fertilizer. And that's a pretty important component of fertilizer. So in one country, they have 9 fertilizer plants. 9 are shut down. Others are operating at 1/3 of what they were operating at a year ago. So go forward on that. What does that mean for next year? Reduced crop yields, that sort of thing. I'm telling you, we are in a real mess. Again, from the Financial Times. Metals trade body Eurometaux says that all of EU's zinc smelters have had to curtail or even completely halt operations, while the bloc has lost 50% of primary aluminum production. Some 27% of silicon and ferroalloy output has also been mothballed, and 40% of the furnaces it adds. The fertilizer sector, which relies on gas as a feedstock, has also been hit with 70% of capacity offline. Goldman Sachs estimates that 40% of Europe's chemical industry is at risk of permanent rationalization unless energy prices are contained. The same story is playing out in plastic, ceramics, and other energy-hungry industries. Consultancy Rhodium estimates that just 5 sectors account for roughly 81% of Europe's industrial gas demand. Chemicals, basic metals such as steel and iron, non-metallic minerals products such as cement and glass, refining and coking, and paper and printing. In some of these sectors, temporary shutdowns are not only costly, often they are almost impossible to implement without permanently damaging equipment. You just don't go and flip the off switch. The threat is particularly acute in Central and Eastern Europe, where many countries have been heavily reliant on Russian gas. Of Europe's 45 million tons of fertilizer production a year, Poland alone produces 6 million tons, according to industry sources. All 5 of its factories are idle. And Poland is a fairly important agriculture country as well. Another 3 million tons of capacity are offline in Hungary, Romania, and Croatia. In Eastern Europe, 20% of European capacity has been shut down. All of these countries are scrambling to offer support to their industries and citizens as the weather grows chillier and energy demand rises. But many companies are already looking beyond the winter to the next and predicting even tougher conditions. Now, one guy says, well, this is not so bad, this Tony Smurfett. I mean, did this guy get beat up at school? I'm sorry, But he said this, our company is spending 3 times what we would have spent under previous plans, but there are reasons to be optimistic. This will accelerate the green revolution. 50 years ago, there were no options for green energy, and now there are. I think this will make Europe very green. And you know who else is happy? Bill Gates.
Well, BlackRock and Larry in particular are a great example of private sector leadership. Anyone who says that climate shouldn't be a factor in how you evaluate the future of a company, that's not capitalism, because companies that have emissions, they are going to be subject to border adjustment tariffs or taxes. You also have to think about companies, if you're dealing with severe weather events, that's got to be factored in. Is the company ensuring that? Are they becoming more resilient? So the attacks are kind of illogical because climate does affect the economy, which does affect investments. The idea that we still need oil and natural gas is also, fairly clear. We're not going to drain all the money away from those sectors. That's how people get to work today. It's how people avoid freezing to death.
So, in other words, this is great.
And people did get a little optimistic about how quickly the transition could be done. Now, without the Russian natural gas being available in Europe, it's a setback. We need to find non-Russian hydrocarbon sources to substitute for those. So there's coal plants running and a variety of things because, keeping people warm, keeping those economies in decent shape is a priority. Now, on the other hand, it's good for the long run because people won't want to be dependent on Russian natural gas. So they'll move to these new approaches more rapidly.
Okay. By the way, speaking of new approaches that might be related, this is a company that made a state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019, and they come out and say, we're going to have the same kind of treatment technology for cancer. We're going to get rid of cancer. No more chemo or everything, because the Charlie Vector stuff went so well. And it says the husband and wife team behind this company's state-approved treatment are at the forefront of groundbreaking technology set to revolutionize medicine and injection that mobilizes the immune system to identify, attack, and kill certain cells. And that agency in our country approved treatment for children, I think down to 6 months of age, and school age. So here's baby Justin, as I like to call him, Justin Fidel Trudeau, talking. I want you to listen to this. This is a few minutes long, so I know it's torture, but endure to the end, okay? Because I want you to, he kind of builds on what Bill Gates said. And so listen to him. He talks about Alberta, and they have a lot of energy. And now these conservatives there, they don't really know what they're talking about because we have climate change, and we're going to deal with it. But listen to what he says about the Ukraine war, okay? Here we go.
We can decarbonize quickly while still being there to provide the very real short-term energy needs that, quite frankly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the global instability is going to require in the short term, even as we accelerate the transformation of our energy mix.
So will the Russian war in Ukraine delay Canada's energy transition?
No, it's accelerating it. It is absolutely accelerating. As people are saying, wow, we built an economic model and a prosperity in some parts of the world, including in Europe, that was reliant on energy inputs from Russia. As they have to get off of that, people are realizing, okay, getting off Russian oil and gas means getting onto more oil and gas to replace that from elsewhere. But it's also showing, okay, but we need to accelerate our moves off of oil and gas, or our moves to decarbonize the gas at least, so that we can actually not be reliant on Russia, but more than that, not be reliant as democracies on autocracies. I mean, we spent a lot of time since the beginning of the war in Ukraine pointing out that democracies with freedoms, rights, with thoughtful capitalist models are the best solution for people around the world. And yes, you should all become democracy.
Okay, I have to stop that, because who shut down the truckers? He talks about freedom. He doesn't care about freedom. As I said, if hypocrisy was water, the world would drown. We would be Pakistan, right? It would be a flood. And he goes on to talk about freedom, and we got to decarbonize. We got to get to renewables. Oh, how's that working in Germany? So Dave Walsh was on War Room yesterday. I like Dave Walsh Energy at Getter. You can follow him. I think he's wise. And I don't know if he talks about it in this clip, but one of the things he talks about is we need, Boris Johnson wants to come back to be prime minister in the UK. And he's talking about, we're going to build one nuclear power plant a year. How many nuclear power plants are currently, which is not carbon, by the way, and probably, if managed properly, the safest form of energy out there. Okay. How many nuclear plants are under construction in the European Union, European zone today? One. Is it online? No. When did they start building it? When did they break ground on it? 2007. And Boris Johnson says, we're going to build one a year. So Dave Walsh talks a lot about energy inputs. You need to have a consistent, always-on power supply. And you don't get that with solar and wind. It doesn't work. And unless you have a battery at home to store the solar energy, electricity generated by your solar panels, you're still on the grid too. You're just using some of the energy and selling some to the grid. But you need the grid too to be on all the time when the sun doesn't shine, which in Ohio, the sun doesn't shine all the time. In the UK, I remember being in London, walking outside it was a cloudy day, and it was 2:00 in the afternoon, and all the street lights were on because it was pitch black. And by 3:30, it's night because they're so far north. So anyway, here's a little clip of Dave Walsh Friday on the War Room.
Not panic in the streets, but demonstrating. Yesterday in Paris, Berlin, Leipzig, and Potsdam, over 100,000 people in the streets on high energy cost, lack of access to energy, great concern. And I wanted to build on the Boris Johnson commentary on his departure, which sounded like a running speech for hopefully not a new term. One of the things you mentioned was a nuclear plant a year, like a chicken in every pot, which they greatly need. The UK could use 4 or 5 more reactors, but the reality of that is Western Europe is building one reactor at this time. It broke ground in 2007 in Flamanville, France, being built by EDF, and also French-owned Areva Framatome, the plant builder. It's now been 15 years under construction. The unit isn't commercial yet, after 15 years, and about 7 billion euro over budget. So we have the same thing going on here at Plant Vogtle in the U.S. with Southern Company, about 10, 12 billion over budget, 8 years late. The issue is in the West, the core competence to build these plants is way eroded, and the regulatory environment behind them is just through the roof, making it close to impossible to build this kind of capacity in any near term. So when he comes out and talks about a plant a year, that's dreamland. Asia, China, India are building about 52 plants, reactors as we speak. The Western world, between Flamanville and Vogtle in Georgia, 3. So again, they're way ahead of us in this space and with the competence to do it. The troubles there are in deep, and they do relate, Steve, directly to this public debt that's
okay. And
a
how do you
massive
finance
issue, and it's been for a long time, but now it's grown massively in Western Europe, in this country, in Canada, and in Japan. The public debt, Steve has and Brad well chronicled the degrees of it. Hopefully, this come to reckoning on it will drive some of the subsidies to non-useful energy sources away, because that is one additional source of huge public spending that is very valueless, and that is subsidizing part-time intermittent resources like wind and solar as opposed to baseload continuous duty power.
So somebody must have been calling him. So listen, why is a lot of this coming up? because of this ESG stuff. Now, this is a conference going to take place this week. You can go and try and register for it. I'm sure the videos will be online. All of their prior 5 conferences have been online. I've talked about this. This is the Financial Investment Initiative. It's an organization set up by a country called Saudi Arabia. And I did an update. Here's the conference that they have, October 25 through 27, Investing in Humanity, Enabling what? A New World Order. And so in my update, I did this on June 6th, or June 9th, 2022, in the middle of the week. Saudi Arabia, ESG, and the Abraham Accords. I talked some about the Abraham Accords and a little bit about Psalm 83, but I focused a lot on this FII Institute, and one of the documents I showed was FII Institute on ESG, which means environmental, social, and governance. This is pushed by BlackRock and a number of other organizations. But by the way, there's some good news. A lot of states are saying if ESG is the governing way that you're deciding to invest in companies, we will not invest our pension funds and other finances there. Florida's doing this. I think Louisiana and some other states. I think Missouri as well. They're just saying we're done with it. And it's having an impact. BlackRock, the performance of BlackRock is down. And part of it is because of people being concerned about this ESG push. So, so you have this, and I kind of love the ESG investing in emergency markets, and they have these documents about how do you do ESG, how do you score for ESG. This is Saudi Arabia. Why does Saudi Arabia want to push ESG? Who's the other big funder of Saudi Arabia through one of their conferences that they have in St. Petersburg is Russia. They've been funding these left-wing groups for years. Why? Because they can get the production shut down in the West on oil and gas. We have to go buy it someplace, like Saudi Arabia, like Russia. And when we send them money, they like that. And if they shut down the supply that they're competing against, the price goes up. And they can do a lot more with their money. And I'm just telling you, I researched this extensively. Go back and look at my June 9th midweek update this year, where I talked about it. And I like I don't know if I like these graphics. I just find them interesting. The technology, the transhumanism aspects that they build into this. And believe me, this transhumanism agenda is tied to the transgender agenda. You can be anything that you want. We can change you into anything that you want. Take a pill, surgery. You don't want to be a boy, you can be a girl. You can be both. It's demonic. So I hesitate to recommend this, but at the Daily Mail today, there was an article about one of these transgender guys pretending to be a female. This is on TV, strips on stage. I mean, naked. But here's the problem. The audience is going crazy. They love it. Boy, people really need the Lord in this. Again, here's another graphic about ESG principles from this FII Institute. But look at what it's tied into, the ESG stuff. They tell you what it's tied into. Towards achieving global sustainable development. And then what's there that they have plastered on the Rubik's Cube? The UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 goals. That's why Saudi Arabia has a 2030 agenda. And believe me, in the Future Focus 2025 from the World Economic Forum, so you have these groups that do this. You have the World Economic Forum, you have the FII, Financial Investment Initiative Institute, FII Institute, Saudi Arabia. You have the World Government Summit in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, another oil-rich country. And then you have a fourth conference, the St. Petersburg SPEITH, Energy, SPEITH, I think it is. Anyway, so these are the four big conferences. And I've seen Saudi guys get up and say, this is one of the four big conferences where the world gets together to discuss these topics. So I'm not making it up. And so here's the thing, investing in humanity. Look at what they're going to talk about, enabling a new world, a new global order. Look at the imagery that they're using in the transhumanism technology. So here's some of the things they're doing. The new energy economy, clash of generations that they're talking about. Welcome to the new global order, the theme for 2022. And it says this: the new global order faces unprecedented challenges, just as it dissolves distinctions between the physical world and the virtual world. This is all the technology stuff we've been talking about. It is redefining what it means to be human. Remember a guy named Noah Yuval Harari who's been talking about this? I've been playing clips of him for 5 years. It is forcing centuries-old concepts like art and money to be reconceived on the blockchain, and is enabling a new generation of space entrepreneurs to expand the boundaries of the known universe. And believe me, we're not going to Mars anytime soon. When they say expanding the boundaries of the known universe, there is a spiritual component to this that they're talking about. This is what Harari's been talking about. This is Saudi Arabia. Understand, will this new global order ignite investments and innovations to solve the wealth gap? Well, will it inspire every person, it says in the last sentence, institution and government on the planet to invest in humanity? And then they go through, they have things, and you can see that they're tying in the ESG into this, equality for an unequal world, balancing success with sustainability. There's your environmental. And then the last one was the rise of geoeconomics. So, and look at some of the things they're talking about. The meta-industrial revolution. Here we go. A bigger brother, what data privacy means in the metaverse. These are subjects they're talking about. Centralizing the decentralized, a conversation on how or whether governments can regulate AI, artificial intelligence, the blockchain, and the metaverse. 22nd century alchemy. Can future tech turn 2 billion metric tons of waste into gold? Now, if you've been around here or the class I used to teach at another church for a while, you know we've been talking about this alchemy thing. It goes back to the Middle Ages. Henry Saint-Simon, you can look him up and what he said. And this is the belief. We're going to create this world. We're going to build this great kingdom. It's all tied in together. It's just now it's like exploding on the scene. And then here's one other topic, NEOM and beyond. Will 2022 mark the turning point for green energy? Here's somebody talking about, we talk about 5G. I've played this clip before. Here's one of the tech company executives talking about 6G.
50 seconds, who wants to answer quickly?
I think it will go, it will, first of all, it will definitely happen. I was talking about 6G earlier, which is around 2030. I would say that by then, definitely the smartphone as we know it today will not anymore be the usual, kind of the most common interface.
Wow.
Many of these things will be built directly into our bodies.
So, you remember when we used to think this system that was coming was a chip under the skin. It's much more than that. It's much more involved. And people are going to be faced with a choice. You know, the people who think they can turn garbage into gold are the ones running this. The people who think that solar and wind solve our energy problems. Why doesn't somebody, when they're doing an interview with Bill Gates, it's like, hey, how many furnaces do you have for that 50,000 square foot house you have in the Seattle area? How many furnaces? What's your energy bill? Now, he probably doesn't know. Doesn't impact him. You know, if he's worth $1 billion or $100 billion, it doesn't really impact his lifestyle. But it does impact a lot of other people. So as Dave Walsh said, there's all these things going on. There's changes in governments everywhere. Georgia Maloney was sworn in yesterday. And of course, everybody's running around, oh, she's a fascist, she's right-wing, oh, it's just terrible. And then this was an article from the Times of London today. Sweden swerves to the right amid migration unease. You know, it's really, really terrible. And energy, Italy has a energy crisis. Over here on the left, it says Croatian oil pipeline offers supply gateway. But here's the problem. Europe needs 155 billion cubic meters of gas. 155. So they're saying, hey, we got this old Soviet pipeline, we can bring it back online, but what's the capacity? 2.9 billion. We hope to get it up to 6 billion in a few years. Well, there's a little bit of a gap between 6 billion cubic meters and 155 billion cubic meters. This is the problem. They don't have the capacity to do this right now. Another government that's fallen is Liz Truss is out as prime minister. She resigned the other day. She did this because if they have a no confidence vote, then they have an election. But if she resigns before the no confidence vote, then the party can put somebody in. But look at what they're doing. This guy came in, Hunt. He's a big globalist, finance guy, and he's sort of running everything, even though she's still the prime minister in name. And they're talking about 5,000-pound fuel bills for people in the UK. The Guardian has this article. BBC prepares secret scripts for possible use in winter blackouts. So just like they prepare, like when Queen Elizabeth died, did you see how like the next day, the Times within a week, they come out with this like 150-page supplement in their paper about Queen Elizabeth? Because they've been working on it for years. Because she's old. And the chances are she's going to die, right? She's 96. They probably started working on it when she was 80, just so they had it. Well, so now they know that winter blackouts are probably coming, and so they're going to have scripts to kind of tell people to, I think, calm them down. Because people get cold and hungry, they just don't handle it that well. Food prices are up. I saw a thing on a thread on Twitter talking about Whole Foods and the prices that, $6 a dozen for eggs. I mean, they've always been high priced, but now people are saying it's a clown show there, the prices. And so they're now referring it to as whole paycheck foods. And Liz Truss, there was a lot of how long is she going to last? There was a suggestion, a week ago. Will this head of lettuce last longer than Liz Truss? So somebody took lettuce and made it into a picture of Liz Truss. Very creative, by the way. And then, of course, here's Der Spiegel. This is the German. Of course, the German people, they're so good, right? What is it that, I think it's Dennis Prager says, on foreign policy and major issues, Germany is always wrong. And so now, but they're criticizing the UK. And so the title is, I won't say the German thing, it's the Banana Island. how the British make themselves the laughingstock of Europe. And here's a thing from the UK, London Times. They're doing they're picking over the body of Liz Truss, taking what might be useful. Apparently, it cost her an arm and a leg. So pensions are, Hunt says, everything will be okay, we're going to do well. And Boris Johnson's going to come back. This morning, UK Times, Tory right spurns Johnson as Sunak support surges. And it's just kind of interesting, the ethnic makeup of these people who are running London and maybe the UK. Here's another article. It says cancer rate rises to 55 days. Oxford, famous town of universities, is going to cut traffic jams by degrees. Clever title. But what are they going to do? They're going to monitor your cars. In fact, if you have a car and you're driving it into Oxford, you're going to get a permit to drive it into certain zones of town. And 100 days a year, you're allowed to go into another zone. And they're going to monitor this. How are they going to monitor this? It sounds like they're going to put in a social credit system. And by the way, if you go into town when you're not allowed to, you're going to get fined. And the fine that I saw was, it was either 700 or 7,000 pounds. Now, who can afford that? Or they'll dock you a day. So in other words, if you go in on a day you'll lose one of your free days. To drive into a city in the UK. This sounds like, who's running this? The CCP? Maybe. And if you remember this editorial cartoon I used back in June, remember they're having all kinds of flight delays and problems, and the people are looking like, we got to get back to the UK, but look, economic gloom, cost of living, record inflation, rail strikes, tube strikes, NHS failings, care home shame, absent GPs. Please cancel our flight home. Let us stay here wherever we are. And that's probably more true 4 months later than the first time I used it. So, and mortgage rates are through the roof. So let's talk about this. I can already see I'm going to probably do a midweek update. I just have one more. No, I don't. I need to stop saying that. Again, that's just me clearing my throat. CPC had big conference, Chinese Communist Party. Under their rules, you're allowed 2 5-year terms as the president. Xi Jinping had reached that limit. So they had a party congress, and I believe today is the vote. He's unlikely, it's undoubtedly he's going to get essentially elected emperor for life. Some of the economists cover the new Mao. And this guy is brutal. I was listening to somebody associated with Frank Gaffney's group. Can't remember who it was. And she said this. There's pretty good evidence. China's going to be under the judgment of God. They have all kinds of financial problems right now. They're big real estate companies on the brink. Currency, they're going through all these lockdowns all the time. And it's affecting economy, supply chains for us. Everything's a mess. She said that China, and I've talked about the demographic problem that China has, it's a problem of their own making. Conservative estimates are that China did 400 million forced abortions. And probably more like 500 million, 500 million forced abortions. God cannot be happy with that. And they're going to suffer the consequences for that. Because it's not just 500 billion forced abortions. It's 500 billion people who will never grow up and never get married and never have children themselves. Do you understand what they did? I mean, what's the United States up? 75 million since Roe 50 years ago? 1.5 million a year, roughly. 500 million forced abortions. And immediately they came out and said, hey, you know what? Xi came out and said, we're going to do this. Now, I want you to look at something in this photograph. Look at this photograph in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. And look at the elites in the front row. And then look at all the people in the party in the back rows. What's the difference? They all have the thing on their face, right? Almost 100%, but the elite's not. Xi urges party to be ready to withstand dangerous storms. A new milestone, the new Mao. Here's a graphic from The Economist of what China really wants. This is important stuff. Taiwan defies the dragon with hope, pride, and parties. And then look at the scene that occurred. So you see Xi sitting there, and this guy that's sitting just one chair away used to be the president of China. Here's the video of what happened. This is absolutely chilling. Watch this. So he's sitting, you see Xi sitting there, and they come to this guy. He was the president of China. And they're like, you need to come with us. And the word is that he was entitled to speak at the Congress, the gathering, because he was the former president. But the word was he was going to be critical of Xi. So before he gets to speak, he is escorted out. Look at the reaction. Watch Xi. I don't want to go. You're coming with us, sir. Just over here. And he's taken off the stage. You're going to see him stop and make an appeal to the person who succeeded him as president of China. See ya. And who knows whether he'll ever be seen again. This is on live TV in China. You think somebody was trying to send a message? Now, I want you to translate this, though, is that he may never be seen again. This was a graphic that was in one of the papers today about Xi, because he's the supreme ruler. He's probably more isolated than any Chinese governor ever. And it affects the performance of the country. This report, it's also in that they've been luring retired Royal Air Force pilots to learn best how to fight Britain. They pay them. And people go along with it. We have police centers run by China in cities in the United States. Do you know this? So they can go after their citizens who are here and not behaving correctly. I just want you to, what we know about what's coming, to sort of translate that to like a Revelation 13 scenario about, and I'm not saying this is the guy by any stretch of the imagination, but what I'm telling you is the logistical part, the foundations of all of this are being put in place. And it's not just China, it's Saudi Arabia and the FII Institute. It's the World Economic Forum. All of these things are being put in place. Now, I don't know exactly what the form of that is, And as I said before, there are people on both sides of the political spectrum that I don't trust. Because eventually, the left, you have the left and the right, it's really more of a circle, and they meet and overlap at some point. That's my view of how this division takes place. So you've got to be concerned about them. So China's delaying its GDP data. Gee, I wonder why they're doing that. I just heard that the Pope has entered into another secret agreement on how the Catholic Church is going to be governed in China with Xi, with the Chinese Communist Party. The last agreement essentially gave the Chinese Communist Party the ability to appoint cardinals. So let me just do this real quickly. This war in Ukraine, there's a lot of different areas in Ukraine. They've taken these Iranian drones into the Crimean Peninsula here in the middle bottom. They're firing them. They're also firing them from Ukraine. This is another great graphic that I saw. I think this was from the Financial Times about, this is how Putin is speaking. That's the implication. They're getting these Iranian drones. Some are coming from Belarus, but they're also being produced in Tajikistan by Iran, but they're coming from Iran. And so one commentator I listened to said this the other day Russia used to be like the greatest arms manufacturer on the planet. I mean, they were number one. And now what are they doing? Well, they're going to Iran and they're buying these drones and bringing them in. Now, Israel was asked to send them in, and Russia said, if you do this, if you send any defensive weapons to Ukraine, it'll destroy our relations. Ayatollah Khamenei so Russia has come out and said, we're not using Iranian drones. What are you talking about? We don't know anything about this. But now, so what do? Well, go listen to what Khamenei said. A few years ago, well, here's the speech. Sound here. It is no exaggeration. These have become a source of honor for the country. Whatever issue our scientists encountered and focused on. This is a speech this week in Tehran at a university. Their work was admired in the world's scientific circles. Sending a satellite into space. Many have a satellite in space, but it doesn't belong to them. They didn't send it up themselves. The implication is, but we did. Of course, we are behind, but we have sent them up. We have been able to do this. Building humanoid robots in Tehran University is something important. Gee, they're on board. Fundamental achievements in the nuclear industry. We have gained knowledge of fundamental issues in the nuclear industry. We're not seeking weapons, bombs, or such things. Boy, is he a liar. But this industry itself has many benefits. We have been able to gain this knowledge. Building advanced equipment for missiles and what? Drones. A few years ago, when photographs were released regarding this, some said they were Photoshop pictures. But now they're saying Iranian drones are very dangerous. Why are you selling them to so-and-so? Why are you giving them to so-and-so? So you see what I'm saying is Russia denies it, but then Khamenei goes and says, yeah, that's what we're doing. So here's some pictures taken in Tehran. And this is the profile of a Shahed 136 drone. And they just fly them into buildings. They're not entirely super sophisticated. Russia has said that they've been upgrading the capabilities of these drones, but they're kind of terrorizing. They're noisy, but compared to other drones, they pretty much have an engine, and they can put about I don't know, 75, 80 pounds of explosives in the nose and fly them. And they can fly for up to, I don't know, 1,500 miles, 1,200 to 1,500 miles. And so they do this. And so, now they're, all these things that we see about them, it's terrorizing the people in Ukraine. And remember, these are pictures that came from the Iranians. I mean, so they fly about 100 miles an hour. If you get off a good shot with a rifle, you might be able to bring it down. But, it's going to explode when it hits. And they're not super sophisticated, I guess is what we're trying to say. So here's Russia, formerly the largest arms manufacturer in the world, now buying these things from Iran. But this helps Iran because they're getting data and information to improve them because they have an ultimate goal as to what they want to do with these things. So here's an article, could Iran's drones push them off, Israel off balance? I don't know. It's here's an article from the Eurasian Times that Russia's upgraded them. This is what they look like. They take them out on flatbed trailers, rail cars, trucks, and they fire them off. And so they've taken them to different parts. This is a place called the Dnipro River. And there's some allegations that there's a dam here up to a little bit out of the picture on the upper right. And so the Ukrainians come out and say, Russia's mined the dam and they're going to blow it up, or they're going to use nuclear weapons to blow it up, and it's going to flood Kherson. And a lot of people are going to die. And then the Russians come out and say, look at those Ukrainians doing propaganda again. We know that they're going to do a false flag and they're going to blow it up themselves and blame us. So then the question is, who do you believe? And the answer is they're probably all liars. But look at this. In Ukraine, the power's down in large part. A third of the power plants have been destroyed by these drones and other missiles. And so now what are people doing? Their windows have been blown up by missile attacks. They have plywood on the windows. And here's a former cardiac clinic in one of the cities in Ukraine. And here's a lady, she's getting ready for winter. And here's her stock of wood, because that's how she's going to stay warm. And it can get down to 20 below. So Russia came out and they said, listen, not only should you not do anything with regard to Ukraine, but you're the cause of all the problems in the West Bank. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in my midweek. I will also talk about the settlement on the some articles. If you want, I've linked 2 articles in the description of the show notes that you should read. But they're also talking about, guess who's going to supply the gas to Europe? Turkey. And so there's all these pictures of these agreements of these meetings between Putin and Erdogan. I'm sure I have it someplace. Yeah, here's Putin announcing it the other day. Turn that up. I think it's a translation.
And tries to seek solutions about the deliveries of the gas. And thanks to God, we have no such problem as the Republic of Turkey. And hopefully, Turkey will become a natural gas hub. In our last talk with Mr. Putin, we have come to terms. So with the Turkish gas and the gas coming from Russia, we will create an energy hub here. And he also announced to the whole world that Europe could buy.
And so then the question becomes, is there going to be enough gas to satisfy the needs? And I'll show you the graphic, which shows, someplace in here I have a graphic of Turkish. Then I just show you, well, anyway, there's a thing called TurkStream. It's kind of like Nord Stream. Nord Stream 1 could produce 55 billion cubic meters a year of gas transferred from Russia to Europe. Nord Stream 2, 55 billion cubic meters. But Turk Stream, which has been built, you can see it across the Black Sea at the top there, only has a capacity of 20 billion cubic meters. And so when you really dig into all of this, and there's people talking about, we're going to get gas from Israel, we're going to get gas from the United States. They don't have the facilities to do this. Here's an article from the Wall Street Journal. LNG ships backed up off Europe's coast. They can't unload because they don't have the facilities to offload the gas, to regasify it. Takes time, takes money, takes a facility. So even if Israel ships a bunch of ships there, it's not going to make that much difference. And this is an article, I think this is talking about China. Orders for LNG ships surge as demand rises from Europe. However, says energy advisor Kate Dorian, there aren't enough LNG terminals in Europe. This will be a problem for Germany particularly. Why? Because Germany's usually wrong. And they've done away with coal, they've done away with nuclear in large part, and it's going to be a rough winter. And in light of that, the urgency of sharing the gospel with people is even greater than ever before. So these two articles, they'll be linked in the show note. Tony Badrin from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's October 11th article in Tablet Magazine. Yeah, boy. Yair Lapid trades Mediterranean gas fields claimed by Israel to Hezbollah in exchange for a line of rusting buoys. And boy, is he right. And then in Michael Duran at the Hudson Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, 7 myths about the historic Israel-Lebanon maritime border agreement. For example, myth 1 is the agreement will make Lebanon less dependent on Iran. And he says the reality, and it's a very good article. You can read the article, download the PDF. I actually put in some buoys there up by Nahariya to show where the buoy line was. And they just didn't pay any attention to it. So listen, the reality is Lebanon is famously corrupt and controlled by Hezbollah, which in turn is controlled by Iran. And Michael Duran and Tony Badrin are absolutely 100% correct. And this was done, I think, in large part to get the elections under control. This is the High Court in Israel's been hearing arguments. Does the Knesset have to vote on it or not? And it's a big political football now. And we're about, what's today, the 23rd? I think the election's in Israel November 1st, which would be, what, a week from Tuesday? Or when? So next Sunday's the 30th. 31st. So I think they're Tuesday the 1st. And it's going to be a real mess. I'm just telling you. Our elections are going to be a mess. So anyway, so look, there's an urgency that we should have, is that there are a lot of people that are going to be facing their maker. There's war. World War E. I stand by what I titled this today. World War over energy. And this is where we are. And how quickly did we get here? 3 years ago, nobody was talking about this, right? We're all talking about end times and rumors of wars and that type of thing. And now not only do we not have rumors of wars, we have wars. And I think more coming. So time to share the gospel, get the message out to people. Be people of strength, truth, no fear. Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for your word. We pray that you will give us opportunities to share the gospel with people. Pray that you will give us wisdom and understanding as we try to ascertain the things that are coming so that we can help people to understand that this is the plan of the God of the universe, and that his son, Jesus Christ, our Savior, will return and set up his kingdom on the earth. Lord, we just pray that you will help us to be wise as serpents, harmless as doves, always looking forward to our being united with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.